1995 saw the birth of two Canadian NBA franchises, the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies. 6 years after they were born, the Toronto Raptors were capping off their second ever postseason berth, as well as their first ever playoff series victory. The Vancouver Grizzlies were on their way out to Memphis. Why did the Vancouver Grizzlies move to Memphis? Let's find out. What's up, everybody? Jacob Abdur-Rahim here with Amateur Hour Sports, where we bring you raw and unfiltered sporting content Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So if it is your first time with me here today, make sure you subscribe right now to stay up to date with all of the future content coming your way. In this episode, I'm going to go over the history of the Vancouver Grizzlies and the events that led up to their eventual move to Memphis in 2001. Let's get right into it. 1995-1996. The Vancouver Grizzlies were first owned by Arthur Griffiths, the owner of the Vancouver Canucks. And the Vancouver Grizzlies played all of their games in the shared General Motors Arena, which is now known as the Rogers Arena. Both the Raptors and Grizzlies attended the 1995 NBA expansion draft, where the other 27 teams chose 8 players to be protected, and the Grizzlies and Raptors could select one unprotected player from each of the 27 franchises. Obviously, it is very difficult to build through an expansion draft, and your team is likely going to suck at the start, unless you're the fucking Vegas Golden Knights, and I have no idea and I do not understand how they managed to pull off what they have done. Both the Grizzlies and Raptors were tasked with selling 12,500 season tickets for their first season. However, the Grizzlies could only muster up 10,000 season ticket purchases. So the company Shoppers Drug Mart took one for the team and purchased the remaining 2,500 tickets to allow the Grizzlies to meet the NBA quota. But the NBA added another constraint to the Grizzlies and Raptors for their first NBA season, as they did not allow them to have a top 5 pick in the 1995 NBA entry draft. So even with the pathetic assembly of the discarded players from the other NBA franchises through the expansion draft, they weren't even allowed to select a top 5 player in the draft to help spark that new team and get people excited and get behind that new team. So with the 6th pick, the Vancouver Grizzlies elected to draft Bryant Reeves. And listen, I'm a fan of the solid, quality big man, and Bryant Reeves was one of those guys at 7 feet tall. You know, they get in those gritty areas, they're solid, they get their rebounds, they get their points, they aren't the flashiest, they aren't the prettiest players, but they do their job, and Bryant Reeves was that. However, without a good cast around that quality big, it's really hard for that big to thrive, and big men aren't exciting players. They don't have the flash or the panache to start off a franchise and get people excited. The Raptors, with the 7th pick, drafted Damon Stoudemire, who was just that. He had the flash, and he brought people into the Skydome when nobody really cared about the Toronto Raptors, help starting them off, giving them that boost to start their season. And Bryant Reeves, like I said, was a quality player. He averaged 13 points in his first season, then 16, another year was 16, and then 10. So he did his job. He just wasn't the flashy player that the Vancouver Grizzlies needed to start off their NBA franchise. And after a bright start to their existence, with 2 straight wins to start off the 95-96 NBA season, the Vancouver Grizzlies lost 19 in a row after that and finished the season 15-67. Not a great start to basketball in Vancouver. 1996-1997. Another constraint was imposed upon the Grizzlies and Raptors for this season and the next 2 after, as they were not allowed to have the first overall selection in the NBA entry draft, even if they were to win the lottery. The Grizzlies, however, had the 3rd overall selection and elected to draft Shareef Abdur-Rahim. And look, at the forward position, Reef was a quality player. He was a good draft pick, and he's probably the best draft pick that the Grizzlies ever had in their entire existence. He was a one-time All-Star, and he provided some excitement that Vancouver had lacked in their first season. However, that one All-Star appearance came in the year after he left Vancouver and joined the Atlanta Hawks. Also, when you consider that he got drafted ahead of Stephon Marbury, Ray Allen, Kobe Bryant, as well as Peja Stojakovic, maybe they could have gotten better at the 3rd overall selection. And even though, like I said, that Shareef Abdur-Rahim was a bright spot in the history of draft picks by the Vancouver Grizzlies, they were even worse their second season and finished 14-68. And oh, by the way, they had another first round pick in that draft, and they drafted Roy Rogers with the 22nd pick. Who's Roy Rogers, you ask? I have not a fucking clue. But he averaged 6.6 points and 4.7 rebounds in his only full season in the NBA with the Grizzlies that year. And 4 years later, he was out of the league. And that included a season off where he played pro basketball in Italy. 1997-1998. An abysmal record gave Vancouver the 4th overall selection in the 1997 NBA entry draft. They elected to draft point guard Antonio Daniels. The point guard extraordinaire averaged a mere 7.8 points and 4.5 rebounds in his only season in Vancouver before they dumped him to San Antonio the next year, where he didn't even start a single game. However, he did win an NBA championship that season. He averaged a mere 7.6 points and 3.5 assists over the course of his career, and the only good moment of his career was being a part of that San Antonio Spurs championship winning team in 1999. And even though he wasn't a big contributor, he has a ring, and not a lot of players have one. The Grizzlies finished a franchise best 19-63. But they started to muster a league average in attendance, as they got over 16,000 fans per game. It seemed like things may have been a bit on the rise in Vancouver. 1998-1999. This is probably the turning point for both Canadian franchises. The Raptors for the better, the Grizzlies for the worse. As if it really could get any worse. The 1998 NBA entry draft was fucking loaded, and the Vancouver Grizzlies had the 2nd overall selection for that draft. They elected to draft Mike Bibby. And look, Mike Bibby was a solid player, and he was a decent point guard. In fact, he was a quality point guard. But when you look at the rest of that draft, it puts into a bit of perspective why it maybe wasn't the best pick. Mike Bibby was selected ahead of two-time All-Star Anton Jameson, Vince Carter, Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Williams, as well as Paul Pierce, who were all taken in the top 10 of the draft after Mike Bibby. And again, Mike Bibby was good, but he never made an all-star team. And the rest of those guys on the list were quality players. The Raptors, who drafted Vince Carter, started to surge. Along with one of their older picks, Tracy McGrady, there was actual excitement in Toronto for basketball. And I credit Vince Carter to be probably the most influential player in the history of the Raptors, because he made Toronto care about basketball when they never had before. It was a hockey town up until that point in their history, and Vince Carter completely changed the narrative. The Vancouver Grizzlies never really had that player with the ability to do such a thing, and that's why they struggled even further from this point. Another problem for the Grizzlies was that this was the lockout year, and it caused NBA attendances to plummet. The Grizzlies fell to one of the worst attendances in the league with under 14,000 fans per game. And a lot of teams struggled in this department, but they were already established and financially sound. And the Vancouver Grizzlies, who were not financially stable at the time and they were unestablished, proved to really struggle, as this lockout was detrimental to the success of the franchise. The Grizzlies put up the worst season in NBA history, as a 160 win percentage has never been worsened in the history of the NBA. They finished 8-42 in the lockout shortened season. No wonder nobody showed up to the games. 1999-2000. Finally, the Vancouver Grizzlies made a good selection in the 1999 NBA entry draft. They drafted Steve Francis with the 3rd overall selection in the draft. And Steve Francis put up some great numbers in his career and was a 3-time All-Star. The problem? He never played a game for the Grizzlies. Point guard Steve Francis made it clear before the draft that he had absolutely no intention of playing for the Vancouver Grizzlies. So even though they had the 2nd pick, they already had an established point guard in their roster with Mike Bibby, who, like I said, was a quality player, just wasn't up to the esteem of the rest of that draft. But Mike Bibby was a good point guard. They didn't really need a point guard, so why draft a guy who didn't even want to play for your team? That's a question I don't have an answer for. They drafted Steve Francis and he forced his way out before he even played a game for them. As a result, he was traded in a 3-team deal involving the Rockets as well as the Magic, where the Vancouver Grizzlies basically acquired a bunch of spare parts who had absolutely no influence on their franchise. However, the one shining light and bright spot of that deal is that the Vancouver Grizzlies got 1998 14th overall pick Michael Dickerson. The shooting guard proved to be a player who could help orchestrate the turnaround of the franchise, as he put up some great numbers in 2 seasons with Vancouver before they moved away. But after his 2nd season and they moved to Memphis, he played a combined 10 games in the next 2 seasons and was forced to retire because of a lot of injury problems. That 99-2000 season, however, the Grizzlies improved to 22-60, which was a franchise best record. They were still bottom of the Midwest Division, and attendance had not improved from the lockout season. 2000-2001, the final season in Vancouver for the Grizzlies. The owners began to lose money on the franchise as attendance failed to recover from the lockout even still. It was clear a change needed to happen. The 2000 draft was not a good draft by any stretch of the imagination, and Stromy Swift was anything but a redeeming quality of that 2000 draft. A franchise best 23-59 season for the Vancouver Grizzlies, though. But such a formidable record could not save the Vancouver Grizzlies and their owners from having to sell their team. They never ever recovered from the attendance lost from the lockout year. And how could they? They were atrocious at drafting players. They never ever got that exciting player like the Raptors did in Damon Stoudemire, Tracy McGrady, or Vince Carter. The draft process that took place in Vancouver is a highlight of how you should not operate your new NBA franchise, because the failures really stem from those drafts. They had numerous top 5 picks that they could never generate any sort of traction with. A few months ago, I had the privilege of interviewing the founder and first owner of the Toronto Raptors, John Bitov. And in that interview, if you want to check it out, in that interview, he stated that the problem with the Vancouver Grizzlies, as well as the draft, was the marketing strategy deployed by them, because the Toronto Raptors knew that Toronto was a hockey town, but they couldn't mimic the marketing strategy displayed by the Toronto Maple Leafs because nobody really cared about the Raptors. So John Bitov said that him and his team made it explicitly clear that they wanted to stay as far away from the marketing strategies of the Toronto Maple Leafs as possible. They were not affiliated with the Maple Leafs in any way. They wanted to do their own thing, their own way, and turn Toronto into a basketball town. And I think they did that with a great degree of success. The Vancouver Grizzlies were owned by the same owner as the Vancouver Canucks. So we basically copy and pasted the marketing strategy of the Vancouver Canucks onto the Vancouver Grizzlies. But basketball and hockey is very different. The fan bases are different. The content is different. The quality of the product can be differently perceived by each of the fans. You can't mimic the marketing strategies from both sports simply because they're sports. You need to have specific strategies in order to promote each sport. And the Grizzlies failed to realize this and could never generate steady attendance. It was time for the owners to sell the team, but not necessarily relocate just yet. The original plan was to sell the team to Bill Laurie, the owner of the NHL's St. Louis Blues, and he wanted to relocate the Vancouver Grizzlies basketball franchise to St. Louis. However, the NBA shut down this move. Maybe it was because they saw how hockey owners had handled basketball franchises with the Vancouver Grizzlies and didn't want to take a chance. Maybe it was because they didn't want to relocate the team outside of Vancouver. The real reason for the NBA not allowing this to go through, I really don't know, but those are my thoughts. Instead, Chicago businessman Michael Hazley purchased the franchise and promised not to relocate them outside of Vancouver. And after promising not to relocate, what did he do after he became owner? Immediately started looking for new places to relocate the franchise outside of Canada. He eventually settled on Memphis as a new location where the franchise currently resides as the Memphis Grizzlies. Memphis have had their ups and downs, but nothing could be worse than the Vancouver Grizzlies, to be honest. At their best, they only won a mere 23 games, and they were never even close to finishing with a 500 record. They also pose the worst win percentage in the history of the NBA. The Memphis franchise have had their bits of success, and I think they are currently on the right path to rebuild with their current player pool. Thanks for watching. If you like, make sure you like and subscribe to Amateur Hour Sports right now to stay up to date with content just like this. And hit that notification bell to make sure that you never miss an episode. Thank you for watching again. We'll see you again next time.